Hello and welcome to another episode of Fireside Chat brought to you by Global Sources. I'm your host Meghlab Hardwaj, and today we're talking about sourcing and logistics trends in 2022. And I've got two amazing people with me, two experts in this field. First of all, I've got Alan or AJ from Titan Worldwide. Hi Alan, how are you doing?
Hello, good evening everybody. Or should I say good morning in Singapore?
Yes, and Hong Kong. So
And
Alan,
Hong
where are
Kong.
you joining us from?
I'm joining you guys from California, from Los Angeles.
Wow.
Awesome. And we've got Dr. Neil O'Connor from Monash University. Hi, Dr. Neil. How are you doing?
Good morning from Hong Kong today.
Brilliant. Welcome back, both of you. So both of you have been on sessions, on Global Sources sessions previously. And of course, Dr. Neil, you've presented at Global Sources Summit and you've been with Global Sources for such a long time now. So absolutely amazing having you guys here. So let's begin with introductions. And Dr. Neil, if you want to go first, tell us about yourself, your experience, and how you help importers.
Oh, very quickly. Yeah, I tell people close to me, I grew up on a farm, so I care about how things are made and how production operations works. I'm an accountant. I write academic papers that no one reads. And I spend a lot of time, especially in the last 5 years, not necessarily the last 18 months, going across the border in Shenzhen, visiting factories, documenting end-to-end their production processes with the view to, in pro bono work, I've been helping factories to improve. At the same time, I use that knowledge to help specifically SMEs that are sourcing specifically for designing IoT products. And I've been advising a lot of IoT startups in the last 18 months in their sourcing, how to manage their sourcing strategy.
Brilliant. AJ, what about you?
Well, I am what you would say complementary to Dr. Neil. They make and manufacture at the point of origin or the point of supply sites, and I bring them over to specifically to the United States, specializing in Asian countries, Near East Asian markets. You name it, we got it. We move quantitative units of measure, we have loose container load, the 20 footers and the 40 footers. And it's been quite a challenge. And it's been a roller coaster ride trying to overcome challenges especially for the SMEs who really do not have that power of leveraging against the multinationals when it comes to the space of logistics right now. Wow. It's really the big boys have that edge over the little guys. And that's what we are both here for, to equalize or to try to alleviate some of the pains for our viewers, or for you viewers at that.
Yes, exactly. And of course, the number of SMEs importing from Asia is increasing at a very fast rate. So very, very relevant. Okay, so AJ, let's talk about logistics first. And or let's talk about 2021. How would you summarize 2021 in terms of logistics? What kind of a year has it been?
As I said, it's a roller coaster ride. It's been a perfect storm, just an amalgamation of different events both, that were very challenging, that personally was devastating for a lot of people across the world. And on top of that, we really needed to still move the product because a lot of them are both essential and both to be consumed, obviously. And we've just seen that development or that progress of crises from the very start of January 2021 to where we're at right now, December, where we've just seen nothing but an upspike of prices, a scarcity of space, massive congestion in the ports, massive delays in our ports here in Los Angeles, backlogs in our national highway systems, our inland ports. It's, again, as I said, a perfect storm. And that's what we would summarize, and I would summarize the points that are worth mention for us to truly understand what we will be facing in the coming year.
Right. And so we are in the perfect storm. We've been weathering this storm for sure. That's kind of a good news if you ask me. At least we've weathered, a portion of the storm, and hopefully people will be more resilient, companies will be more resilient moving forward as well. Dr. Neil, how would you summarize 2021?
2021, partly a continuation of 2020, and that is this notion of power. In other words, and power and visibility. Power from the point of view that the big thing that we noticed in 2020 for the first time, suppliers in certain sectors had a lot of power, and they took advantage of that in terms of shipping substandard PPE. And we had the mask problems in 2020. This year we had nitrate glove problems. So that's a continuation. When you get gyrations of supply and demand that partly it's borne out because of the logistics, you find that suppliers in certain sectors have a lot more power, a lot more opportunity, and for some suppliers to act opportunistically and not tell the buyers about what they're really doing with their final product manufacture. With that power came about because buyers don't have visibility because of border closures. Border closures are continuing from 2020 on to 2021. So those two things are continuing, and I think it will continue further, but there are strategies that buyers can take to help deal with, especially dealing with this visibility brought about because of border closures.
Right. So AJ, go ahead. Did you want to add to that?
I would second Dr. Neil's facts that he just presented, but also we've learned to discover that greed is simply unlimited. And we've seen that in our supply chain. We've seen that in our suppliers. A container that used to cost $3,000 right around Chinese New Year, towards peak season and this summer, we've seen them go as high as $20,000 to $25,000.
Wow.
And these people who were paying it, or these companies, were not the SMEs. These were actually the big Fortune 500 companies who really wanted to ensure and lock down that their supply chain and wouldn't falter or wouldn't be delayed because of the products that they were assembling here in the United States. So we've seen that greed being manipulated by the ocean carriers by pulling out vessels that should have alleviated the supply chain problems, but instead they took them away to keep that shortage or scarcity going. So I'm sure a lot of you guys were hearing about blank sailings. What are these blank sailings? These are really ships being pulled by the ocean carriers, even at the height of shortages. And again, all I could say is that greed affected prices to go up. And now here in the States, and the consumer is suffering for it, we have inflation. We have hyperinflation now.
Mm. Well, the farmers are suffering too, Alan, because a lot of US farmers are trying to get produce to China.
Yes.
But the ships are going back from the US back to China. They want to turn around very quickly out of the LA port, get back and not load up and not wait for a week or two to get loaded up with US produce. They'd sooner come back to China to get those 20,000 US dollar container loads again.
Correct.
Yeah, incredible. So AJ, what about the situation now? I mean, of course, prices were, really, really high. I was hearing even up to 30,000 from China. But what about the situation, the current situation? I mean, they have sort of started going down a little bit in the last couple of months, but what are you seeing now? Are they coming back up? And going into 2022, what can people expect?
Well, we reached that sort of a peak towards the end of summer, and we've seen prices spiral down. But then again, it started to pick up right after Thanksgiving. And so we're seeing, again, $20,000 container prices, something that the steamship lines are adding this premium guaranteed service of anywhere from $6,000 to $7,000 on top of the ocean freight, which we're running at around a level of anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000. So that's why it's hitting at that $21,000 level. And again, it's the security of these larger companies who want to ensure that their supply chain remains unfettered and uninterrupted that's paying these fees. The SMEs or smaller shippers or importers that we have are all waiting and hope. It's almost like the lottery now. They book a shipment and they may get rolled over once or twice or thrice before their shipments go on board, but they're at that 12, 13, 14,000 dollar level at this time.
Wow. Yeah. We did the calculations on that. If what you're putting in that container, if it's less than 3 ton, it's cheaper to send by air. So it's amazing.
Yeah. So how do you think Chinese New Year is going to affect prices? Because I mean, every year for Chinese New Year, there's there's a rush of orders. Everybody's trying to get their orders in. And how do you think that's going to affect prices and the overall logistics situation this year?
Well, this year we have to cope with the additional fact that the Chinese government is limiting power for manufacture. That's another factor that we didn't really see coming. And now we've accepted that a lot of these factories really had to shut down even during their peak momentum during the summertime and the fall. And now what we're hearing, or what I'm hearing, is from our agents, is that the local governments are in fact trying to limit power again earlier than Chinese New Year.
Oh.
So again, that means you may want to just start to process or put your orders right now during December, just so that right before Chinese New Year, when the Chinese government seems to want to allow their people to leave earlier, at least your products may be waiting at the Chinese base ports instead of getting caught, unawares from traditional pre-COVID periods where in February was still a good time to ship.
Right. Do you see any respite in sight, like in 2022, maybe after Chinese New Year, or do you see prices going down at any point in the near future?
Not at
or is
this
this
time.
a new normal?
This seems to be the new normal. People from our industry have been hoping for a respite of prices, and we were hoping that by Chinese New Year things or pricing would stabilize, maybe at least be cut in half, but that's not happening. Right now, the forecast is, with the perceived economic downturn that we will be feeling in the months ahead, our need for consumer goods may slow down, but that's towards Q4 of 2022.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, so not very good news as we head into 2022 in terms of logistics. Challenges still going to be there. So, people need to be, but at least we are prepared now. We've been through all of this in 2021, and I think a lot of companies have come up with innovative ways to adopt and to adapt to all of these changes. So, Dr. Neil, I want to talk about this very interesting study that you are doing. And this is the sourcing shift study. And this, I think, is going to be a big trend in 2022 as well, diversification, sourcing market diversification. So tell us all about this study and tell us some of the key trends that you're seeing in the study.
It did seem like sourcing shift has been going on for the past decade. Like when we talk about sourcing capacity or moving capacity out of China, and we're not talking about companies closing down their operations in China and setting up somewhere else. It could be, we define sourcing shift where they actually order less from their contract manufacturer in China or their factory in China. They scale it down and then they order more in another country. And I've been documenting with my team for the last probably 12 months now, because I just want to know everything what's going on rather than listening to, well, one company's moved and this company's moved, so it's the end of China. And it's never going to be the end of China in that way, because China's economy just keeps on powering ahead. But if we look at all of the moves, and we've documented 132 companies that have voiced their intention and their strategy to shift capacity from China to another country. And there's a total of 228 countries identified. And if we look at the dominant country that they've moved to, it's Vietnam, 67 out of 132. That's half. But if you look at those 67 moves, most of them have gone to, 57% have gone to an existing factory. But if you contrast that with the 19 companies that decided, we are shifting to India. But, 11 out of those 19 are setting up a new factory. And actually the average capacity of the movement to India is much higher than any capacity of move to Vietnam. So it's interesting. You cannot just say, oh, India and Vietnam is the new thing. It's horses for courses. Different countries have different complementarities. And then even we've pieced out that those companies moving to North Vietnam in the electronics area then are different from those moving to South Vietnam, which are much more the apparel, textiles. Actually, Vietnam just passed Bangladesh as the second largest exporter in the world of apparel, shoes, footwear, passing Bangladesh, so for the first time. And a lot of that's in southern Vietnam rather than northern Vietnam. So there are countries, but then there are locations in the countries. And if we just give you I'll give you one story just for the SME audience out there. Like a backpack manufacturer in China, they had 4 different types of backpacks that they were sourcing and getting manufactured in China, and they did make a decision, we need to move to Vietnam. So what did they do? They were developing a 5th line. They thought, okay, we will not develop that 5th line of backpack in China, we'll develop that in Vietnam instead. And so therefore you can go right from the design stage right through to the end of the sampling and product order and rollout right from scratch. And that's the best strategy for an SME to make a sourcing shift, rather than move established lines from one country to another, because the transaction costs are just too high.
Right. And so are these companies actually setting up their own factories in these countries, or are they contract manufacturing to existing factories there?
Especially for the multinationals, a lot of contract manufacturing going on. Example like Nike, all but closed up in China. They could do that because they moved to Vietnam and just expand their orders with their 116 contract manufacturers. So the multinationals have that global footprint where for them, it's not really a sourcing shift. It's more like an order shift. Hasbro, moves out of China and then it goes to India, Vietnam and Mexico for different reasons. So, they want to source for the world from Vietnam and India, but for the US market, they're setting up in Mexico. So, these large, and Hasbro work with contract manufacturers again. Foxconn set up in India, they're set up in Vietnam purely because Apple wants to expand its capacity in those countries. And so for these large companies, for the dominant, just one more thing with the sourcing shift, when you read more media reports, we always think, oh, it's the Trump presidency, it's the trade war, but it's more than that. We count 17 reasons for moving capacity out of China to other countries, grouped into 3 areas, and that is geopolitical risk, which includes the trade war. We could include, human rights issues, pressure put on by US on different countries, Xinjiang cotton, for example. But then there's the pressures from China as China wage rates are going up. And also, for example, you may have had a factory in the city of Shenzhen, and then the government says, sorry, we're repositioning this land. It wants to be residential. You need to move to another area. So in that instance, you may think, okay, do we move to another area? We've got to do a new factory location, or do we go to another country? So that's a country push, and then also there's a country pull, whereas like the Japanese and Korean governments, they gave a lot of incentives for their companies to actually move out of China, and even Vietnam was given incentives for to attract various industry sectors into Vietnam. So you got the push, you got the pull, and you got the geopolitical risk. And the big advice I give to any SME or any procurement team strategizing about sourcing shift is you never move country for one factor alone. There's always 2, 3, 4 different factors you move.
What are the top 3 factors that companies have identified for the move? Top 3 factors.
Yeah, definitely. Geopolitical risk is a big one, but equal to that was the labor costs and the costs in China have gone up. They're the 2 big things, things that have driven this move to move capacity out of China into another country.
Right. What kind of companies are included in this report? Are they mostly SMEs? And in which countries are they based? Are they mostly US companies or European companies, or is it a mix? And are they, big MNCs, or are they mostly small and mid-sized kind of companies?
Very, very interesting. Like out of the 132, there's 45 American owned. So you'd say, okay, that 30%, 1/3 US owned. But then also there's nearly 10% of those firms are Chinese owned. So you have Chinese owned companies deciding, okay, we need to diversify our own manufacturing as well. Korean firms, there's only 7 out of 132. The Japanese and Taiwanese firms make up the larger two dominants, making up about 15% each. So, and the Japanese and the Korean firms, a lot of their move is very geopolitical risk instigated because of, for example, the US put in a missile defense system in South Korea, and then Hyundai had to just close down all operations in China because there was a big backlash against the Korean brands. And Hyundai all but exists now in China, not there at all. So, these things can just drive the whole thing out. H&M, they had the same trouble with China because of Xinjiang cotton, because they went out and said, none of our cotton in our products, to the worldwide market is from Xinjiang. And, we're looking after, we are aware of human rights and things like that. But then in China, that caused a big backlash against the H&M brand. How dare you actually go and say that? You're done if you do, damn if you don't. If you get, SMEs, they want to get large, they have the resources, they can deal with all this risk. But when you get large, then you've got another problem. You've got huge reputation risks to protect that could actually be damaged overnight with one little thing you say wrong in the media, like what H&M did. Then in Vietnam, H&M, they somehow had a map of Southeast Asia, and they had a little dotted boundary around the Spratly Islands showing, the incursion of China, and, China owning, partly claim over the Spratly Islands. And then the H&M was black banned in Vietnam for a certain time. So you've got to be very, very careful when you're large. The reputation risk is huge.
Exactly. So this is a very fascinating report, and I think we need to do a separate session with you where you can go through the findings of this report in detail. But in case anyone's interested in getting this report, you can reach out to Dr. Neil at his email address, neil@ricebox.com, and get a copy of this report. It's called Sourcing Shift. So Dr. Neil, of course, diversification, would you say, is then one of the key trends that will continue to evolve and happen in 2022?
Absolutely. And just keep that in mind. There's red versus blue. Diversification, red means you go into another country that you already are there. And then the blue diversification, you go into a country for the first time. And so if I were to talk to country governments around the world, they're trying to attract FDI, they need to be very, very clear about what type of FDI are they attracting. Are they trying to attract FDI for the first time, where they actually really have to show, from start to finish how new companies and new factories can be set up? Or are you trying to expand your existing ecosystem that you have existing? So very, very interesting. Don't move for one factor alone, Megla. That's the big thing.
That's the big thing. Right.
Right.
So yeah, AJ, go ahead.
Adding into the diversification of a lot of these factories from China, that migration really started right around, well, I would say right when Mr. Trump won the election, and when he started to already on his platform, his campaign platform, say to a lot of these American companies and a lot of these American workers who were disenfranchised or had a decade ago lost their jobs from factory migrations or just from being out competed by the Chinese factories, that they were going to impose tariffs. We started with a 10% additional tariff. A year later, they hit us with another 25%. So now I have on a boots on the ground perspective, an importer of mine who imports backpacks from China. He used to only pay 8% tariff from China. Then came the 10%, so that became 18% of his commercial invoice. And then the 25% rolled in. So now, from a previous 8% added cost to his invoice, now he's paying 25, 10, plus 8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
And then you add the shipping costs to that.
Of course. So now we're seeing a direct impact on the profits of our small to medium-sized enterprises. And true enough, they did go to Vietnam and sought out contract manufacturers, because a lot of these large companies that do contract manufacturing also do smaller runs for companies like the ones that I had just mentioned.
Yeah,
But
makes sense.
it's interesting because when I was visiting the factories, 2017, 18, started and 19, and when they were facing, a lot of the buyers or the SMEs were coming back to the factory to say, look, we've got to wear a 10%, 15%, 20% tariff at the other end. So we want to pass this on to you. They were getting pressure to be passed on, and really depend on how much power the buyer had, how much they could pass on to the factory. But it was nearly impossible to pass it all on to the factory, less, their sustainability is just going to be threatened. The factory would just have to close down if they can't make money. So, and like up until the 2020, before the border closures, you could deal with that as an SME because you visit factory, you keep that relationship going, keep that strong, and work through these problems. But with the border closures, it's 10 times more difficult for SMEs to have that same relationship with the factory. And that's the big thing that SMEs need to think about, is that relationship is so critical to have. That's kind of like, it just keeps you, that buffer with your suppliers, very, very critical.
Right. So Dr. Neil, what are some other trends that you see in terms of sourcing from Asia in 2022? Okay,
let me continue with another big project. We'll talk about this in another one too. Whereas I've been analysing the audits undertaken by a third-party auditor in the last decade, over 12,500 audits that were undertaken. Just thinking about, okay, if buyers were to get a factory audit within 6 months, 3 months, 1 month before the product audit, is the factory audit outcome associated with the product audit outcome? And we have a very high significant relationship between the outcome of the factory audit and the product audit. But it is so interesting, and I don't understand why that out of the 12,500 product audits ordered, there was only about 500 factory audits ordered. Buyers don't seem to see the value of factory audits. And I think with the border closures that are continuing, I would actually, my big advice is think more about having factory audits done, especially in the selection due diligence process. Even the supplier blacklist study, another study I've been looking at, where we looked at over 3,000 complaints by buyers of suppliers, not just China, but many countries around the world. One of the big things that drove whether the complaint was about a real fraudulent scam was if the buyer was able to visit the factory, and if the buyer was able to do a factory audit on the supplier. So this front-end due diligence. If that took place, it's less likely that the complaint was about they lost their money and the supplier was a fraud, versus a complaint where, well, we just got poor quality, but you can deal with it. It just costs you more, and more negotiation, haggling on the next order and things like that, which, that's normal course of international sourcing. But you want to avoid these fraudulent suppliers that can take advantage of this low visibility environment going forward into 2022. Factory audits.
Yeah, and totally agree with that. I mean, of course, people have not been able to travel to China, India, to Asia, and it's extremely important to do that. And of course, companies like Global Sources, we do a lot of verification of the factories and the companies, and the businesses are verified and checked. So there's less chance of like a fraudulent company if you're sourcing from global sources. But I think even if you find a company on global sources, you want to make sure that the company is right for you. And that's the purpose of the factory audit. Does the company have the capability and the equipment and the machinery and the expertise of the type of product that you specifically want? I think that sort of factory audit or doing a factory audit for that reason will really help solve some of the quality issues. Because if a company is not really familiar with the types of products that you want to produce, there can be quality issues. But if the company has been doing those kinds of products and they have exported those specific products to other buyers in the past, then there's less likely to be quality issues. That's what I've personally found as well. So yeah, factory audit, super important. And they will continue to be important because it doesn't look like the borders are opening up anytime soon, right?
No, they're not. And $300 for a factory audit, it's something that I don't know why more buyers don't do it. But anyway, it's I think now, border, less visibility. Just adding on to that, kind of think about, okay, what can SMEs do to better prepare for 2022? Number one, factory audits. Number two is thinking about, okay, it's very hard to get that relationship with the supplier to build it up when your border closes, but you can develop a relationship with a third-party proxy, a third-party auditor that goes into your factories. I've said this at Global Sources many times on presenting at Global Sources, is develop a relationship with your third-party auditor, develop a relationship with that third party that's helping you connect with your supplier. Because invariably, that's probably more important to you because they give you the technical detail of the checking that they're doing, and you want to know that a technical detail fits with the product that you are sourcing. And you don't want to end up with that situation where you're ordering those 10,000 milliamp hour power banks, and you get a power bank that is half filled with a 5,000 milliamp hour cell inside, but the other cavity is filled with sand, which has happened, and was shipped to the USA, and the buyer didn't find out until customers complained that the energy is draining in half the time. What's going on with this 10,000 milliamp hour power bank? Because the auditor wasn't asked by the buyer to actually test the actual milliamp hour charge coming out of the power bank. All the auditor was asked to do was, can you check the weight of the power bank and check all the other specifications? So how do you get around these little things? You just got to have lots more conversations with the auditor. You cannot just say, oh, auditor, here's $300, go do your job. SMEs, get to know your auditor a little bit more in your product that you are sourcing.
Exactly. Totally makes sense. And I also want to give a shout out to Renaud Anjoran, who is a friend of Global Sources. He's really experienced in quality audits, product inspections. And if anybody wants help, they can go to his blog. He's got an amazing blog called qualityinspection.org. And he puts out a lot of great content related to quality and inspections. So Dr. Neil, are there any other trends that you want to highlight for SMEs specifically in 2022?
Just invest in relationships. We've gone from a trend of focusing on efficiency to resilience. So therefore, you need to build more slack in the whole system. Inventory is going to be a norm now, and Alan will check me on this, that it's great to have extra inventory, but there's no warehouse space in this region for any good dollar that you can buy. It's all taken up because it's all waiting for ships to take the containers away. So but you still need to find ways to help improve the processes of the supplier's factory. And the basic thing I tell any buyers that go to a factory, if you want to help them, you can help them 3 ways. Number one, help them in ways of, cut their administration. The factory needs to cut its own inventory and actually find ways to improve its own processes. So if there's any ways that you can help your supplier improve their processes, that can try and help them make them more sustainable. So, it's tough, but border closures are going to be there in 2022. So invest in the relationship with your third-party provider, proxy, a merchandiser that you have employed on the other side of the border. Focus on that relationship and don't take it for granted.
Incredible. AJ, what about you? What do you think importers can do in 2022 to deal with the whole logistics perfect storm?
Well, as I echo or I mimic what Dr. Neil had just said, there's that flexibility now in your supply chain, which you have to consider. Because ever since the early 80s, we did rely on the JIT system, the just-in-time. Mm-hmm. And now nothing actually happens on time or gets delivered on time. And so there has to be lessons learned from the military, wherein you do just pre-position supplies. Put that in a third-party warehouse that, of your choice. Some companies have already started doing that. We saw that early last year, or same time last year, when Amazon based storage capacity based on the seller's IPI. We've seen how everybody was panicked because of those new metrics was imposed by Amazon. And now the same thing has happened. I mean, may you be supplying to a big box? May you still be doing e-com? Pre-position more inventory here in the United States. Another thing that's very, very important is you have to vet the transport company or the transportation company that you use. DDP has been very attractive to small companies because it seems like it's a big difference in pricing from when approaching a more established freight forwarder like ourselves against what a lot of the Chinese agents are offering as DDP. When in reality, when you close your terms with a supplier in China doing DDP, you actually have no leverage or ownership of the goods. And the scary thing is that it's not transparent. It's not a transparent system. I've seen complaints either posted on social media or just sellers that contact me wherein they have no idea of when their shipment is coming up for delivery to either Amazon or their suppliers. It just sort of pops up magically with a UPS transmittal here in the United States and a scheduled delivery by small parcel delivery into Amazon. When in reality, when you employ or contract a company like ourselves who is in the business, that's been licensed and regulated by Federal Maritime Agency and other agencies out there in the US, you can trace your house bill from the time it leaves your supplier's door. We will issue a trackable bill of lading that you can use and track and trace and call us and bother my customer service people up to the time that we deliver to either your ultimate supplier or Amazon. A lot of people do not understand or buy into the myth that, hey, it's DDP, it'll get there. When in reality, a lot of things that are happening is that your cargo might still be in China, just waiting for a cheaper container box that will be consolidated by other Chinese shipping agencies. I've seen that time and time again. And sometimes I even see or hear about people coming to us asking for help because they can't trace their shipments at all. So
Alan, our blacklist study showed that out, Alan. Right? The buyers that actually went with the promise from the supplier to deliver it directly to the US, there was more fraudulent claims in that. And it is safer for them to work with FOB or, and then go with the forwarder like you're talking about.
Totally makes sense. So I guess what you're saying, Alan, is 2022 is a time to take control of your shipping, of your logistics, and start managing it yourself with a good freight forwarder because there's just so much uncertainty in the whole supply chain logistics that you don't want to be caught off guard with your products being stuck somewhere. Or I've also heard of situations where the ship was actually turned around because there were some other products in the ship that were maybe rejected by customs or something like that, and the buyer's products did not even cross customs in the US, and they went back to China. So it's kind of scary.
I have yet to hear about an actual vessel turning around because they had
The products,
contraband
like,
materials.
not the vessel exactly, but maybe the products or the shipment on the vessel. So yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry. Another urban myth that we have to clear over here is when a Chinese supplier would say, oh, customs is taking its time, it's 20, 30 days now. In reality, we can clear shipments 5 days or a week before the vessel arrives.
Wow.
We just need your commercial invoice and your bill of lading. And that bill of lading, which is truly an instrument of commerce, is what we need.
Right.
And unfortunately, DDP method of transport will not give you that bill of lading because you do not own the cargo. And you are at the mercy of if and when your cargo ultimately shows up and gets cleared. And may I say, quite, it could also be quite technically questionable
Illegal.
when they get cleared. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to be PC. I'm sorry. And so you can also be subject for that risk. So again, minimize your risks by employing a registered and a regulated freight forwarder. There are a lot of Chinese suppliers out there or shippers that are regulated and are established and are listed in the Federal Maritime Commission website. And they are all traceable and they are all bound to abide by U.S. laws.
Right. AJ, what's the situation at the U.S. ports? Because we heard that there was like a lot of congestion, especially in Los Angeles, and a lot of the ships were going to New York because from India, most of the shipments go to the East Coast, and there's typically less congestion there because not a lot of shipments are going to the East Coast.
Correct.
The West is more congested typically, but we were seeing delays and congestion in the East Coast as well over the last couple of months or so. So what is the current situation?
Well, officially, there are only 30 ships outside of the Los Angeles harbor. What's not being said is that there are 70 beyond the territorial waters that are just waiting to come in. So I did check as of 2 days ago, there was about a total of 100 ships waiting to get serviced here in the ports of Los Angeles. So that's not going to get any better. I remember same time last year, there were only 30 ships outside, and that was already cause for concern. So now that's been tripled. And of towing the government line, there's only 30, but when I did check, there was 70 out there still waiting to be serviced. It's going to be the same thing for the next several months. As I said, pre-plan, try to pre-position, order more product, and keep it with an accredited warehouse, an accredited freight forwarder.
Okay, makes sense. So we're going to start wrapping up over here. And guys watching, if you have any questions for our guests, please type them in the comment section. We'll also be taking your questions over here. So Dr. Neil, if there's one piece of advice that you have for importers going into 2022, what would that be?
Work with a good third-party proxy. Know that you have a third-party proxy that can go in physically and visit your supplier. Critical. Don't try and do it direct and trust anything that's just on the website that the factory products are displayed.
Great advice. AJ, what about you? One piece of advice.
Buyer beware. Make sure you vet your transportation company that you use. We have the saying, buy once, cry once. Might be a little more higher than the normal DDP, but at the very end, you are assured that your risks have been minimized by the freight forwarder or by your transport partner.
Great, amazing. Thank you so much both for joining us today. And I'm going to just show your email addresses in case anyone is interested in reaching out to you. So reach out to Dr. Neil and get that study that he has done, neil@ricebox.com. And I will be in touch with you separately, Dr. Neil, because I'm interested in the
Thank
study,
you.
and we'll probably do
Yeah.
a separate webinar with you for
We
that.
should.
So yeah, fascinating. And then of course, reach out to AJ or Alan at titan-worldwide.com. He's amazing. He's been, how long have you been in the logistics industry, AJ? Like 20 years?
20 years
20 years.
through various positions.
Right. Yeah. Amazing. Very, very experienced. And he's my go-to person for any information that I need about logistics in, globally. So fantastic resource for you guys. All right. Thank you so much for joining us here. Alan, Dr. Neil, wish you happy holidays, a very happy and successful new year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megha, and thank you, Alan. Very nice to be on the
Thank you,
board.
sir. Thank you, Neil.
Awesome. And thank you everybody for joining us today. It has been quite quiet. We didn't have a lot of questions. We didn't have any questions today. So, but wish you all the very best for the holidays and wish you a very, very happy new year. And we will see you next year. Bye.
Okay. Bye, everyone.